Hey, Jinx!
Truck stop!
This is JJ Jinx, and I'm back from my road trip. I just rolled into town last night, pretty late, and I'm still tired. It was a lot of driving, but I had a ton of fun, I have a ton of stories, and I got a ton of stuff to show you. But first, I want to talk about the knives that I carried for a couple of weeks, because my road trip ate up half of December. Now, I tried to rotate through the knives as evenly as possible because I knew I had limited time. Let's start by talking about this knife by Benchmark. I wanted to love this knife because I like Benchmark. First of all, the hand feel is great. It does all the right things, the contouring, the ergonomics, and the blade is also great. It cuts. You can see it's got a lot of crap on it from the stuff that I cut. But what I didn't like was how quickly the blade began to migrate towards that scale up there. And I saw that and I was like, yeah, that's the sign of a cheap knife. Normally, that kind of migration is commensurate with blade play, but there's no blade play. The blade just kind of moved there. So that was one thing I noticed right away that I did not like. I don't know if it would continue until it starts colliding with the scale, but it's just not a good thing. Actually, I think it just did hit the scale. That being said, the action's very smooth. It's on bearings. The real reason I didn't bring this to work was because this pocket clip, as sleek and as cool and as awesome as it looks, is terrible. I couldn't get it to work. There's just not enough space between it and the scale to actually lift and slide over your pocket material. And I could, kind of force it down, but I didn't want to deal with that. So I just cut lots of stuff at home, and here we are. It was a cheap knife, so I guess, not a 0 out of 10, but close to it. Unfortunately. I guess I'll bring the Gerber Suspension NXT multi-tool out. I did not use this very much. It's too big for my hands. I can't really use the pliers very well, and even though everything's nice and chamfered or folded, there's no real sharp edges on it or anything, it's still somehow not very comfortable when you really bear down on it. I did use the blade, a little bit. It's half serrated, which I don't care for, but I just used it to cut things and it was quite awkward. Just because, you're holding this big thing and you got this little blade, and it didn't really work very well for me. But if a multi-tool were your only option, I'd probably go with something smaller. The Dime, perhaps, if you wanted to stick with this brand. It is big, and its pocket clip, which does work pretty well, this nice folded approach, made it very easy to slip in and out of the pocket, but it was so big that I couldn't really put anything else in my pocket that I needed access to because, oof, what a barrier. So, if you're looking for a more in-depth review about the Gerber Suspension NXT, I'm afraid you might have to go to a different channel because that's all I've got to say about that. Didn't use it enough to give it a fair review. Well, the next one I grabbed was this one. I forgot who made it. Canon, I think? Yes. Where to begin? I guess I love the look of this knife, and even though it looks very, very long, it actually fits in the hand pretty well. I think it's just because it's so slender, it just looks a hell of a lot longer than it actually is. And I like that sound it makes. I used this mostly for opening mail and packages, and it was fine, but the fact that it's so long made it a little awkward, because the tip's all the way out here. When you open a package, it's all the way down there. And I don't know, that was just different. I like the scalloped file working. That's a pretty cool look. And yeah, now I've got to experience this classic Spanish style knife. Well, one thing I didn't like was, since the blade is so long, it doesn't really have play, it's just flexible. And if you flex it just right, it doesn't close. It just kind of goes off to the side, like that. Not a huge deal, just push it back into the middle, but that can't be good for the edge. Overall, I liked it, and the price was right. And then we come to the ZT knife, which was the General's knife. Very expensive, but a great knife. The 0350 Canonian design. And if that name sounds familiar, it is because he's the same guy who designed the Leek, the Chive, and a bunch of other ones by Kershaw. Because ZT and Kershaw are kind of the same company. Yeah, it's like a Wee Knives, Civivi kind of relationship. The budget knives go under the name Kershaw, and the premium knives go under the name Zero Tolerance. I'm sure pretty much everybody knows that, though. Now, at first I was weary about the short and stubby pocket clip, but it actually worked great. I didn't really add or detract anything from the pocketing experience. I think it's cool that you can put it pretty much anywhere you want. I left it in the tip down position because I didn't feel like moving it, and it seemed to have worked just fine because I had no complaints. This knife is beefy and heavy, and it's a tank. I gotta tell you, there was one day where I was working in the lab and something came up, and all of a sudden I had to put together a gas manifold for a nitrogen tank where I needed 2 gas lines at 2 different pressures, which meant I needed mass flow controllers and valves, and I needed to cut the tubing, and I was exasperated at that point, so I just grabbed this knife and cut the tubing like that on those black chemistry tables. Just mashed the blade right into it, because I was over it at that point. I was kind of tired and overworked for the day, and all of a sudden I got to put together a gas manifold? Fuck that. And the blade was... oh, shit. Anyway, the blade was fine. This metal's great. What is this steel? It is, S30V. I'm a fan of this stuff now. It took a beating that most other knives I own wouldn't survive, and it's, perfect. So, for that reason, I think this might have been the best knife in the box. I mean, the most expensive one, so that's not a surprise. But sometimes the cheaper knives win out. Just not this month. Speaking of cheaper knives, I also carried the Marbles Lady Leg knife. I didn't use it a whole lot, but it's not very comfortable. The whole leg look thing is just for looks. Doesn't feel that great in the hand. The shoe kind of stabs into my pinky finger. Now, I know there are larger lady legs, and it is an old design. You can find antique ones, and maybe the longer leg would suit me better. I did like the short clip point blade, because you can bear down on it, sort of, like that. But what can I say? It's a cheap little Marbles blade with an uncomfortable handle. Fan of the look, not fan of the function. Let's talk about the Case Copper Lock knife. I think that's what it's called. Copper something. I did use this knife quite a lot. I gunked them up really good. I was very concerned about the deformations that I found in the clip point blade. You can kind of see it there. But it actually didn't affect the use of the knife. It cuts just fine, exactly as you would expect for a Case blade. So, I guess to me, it's just cosmetic, and I'll keep it because I like the scales. The red colored bone, I think, looks very handsome. I used the pen blade just because, well, it was there. It is a bit long for a pen knife, and so I got a lot more use out of it than I would have if it was the traditional, shorter, stubbier kind. And it's actually very comfortable. I was also concerned that this blade being there, closed, while using this big one, wouldn't feel good, but it's fine. I can feel it, but it's nice and chamfered and smooth, so it was fine. And finally, we come to the Browning knife, which came in a nice tin, and this knife was surprisingly good. The pivot is nice and smooth. It is very flickable. I kind of wish it had a flipper tab. I like flipper tabs. Some people don't. Thumb studs might work just fine. The lockup was good. The centering was good. It was better than the benchmark knife for, all of those metrics. One of my concerns was that the Browning logo in the pocket clip would do something funky, because that is kind of different, but no, it functioned just great. In looking for things to complain about this knife, I suppose being able to move the pocket clip would have been a nice option. It doesn't matter much to me. I use the pocket clips wherever they are, and it seems to be just fine. But other than that, for its price point, there's very little to complain about with this knife. I guess it's a cheap steel, so there's that. And it's got nice comfy grooves that my fingers actually go right into. So Browning, you did a good job. A knife by a gun manufacturer that is actually competently made. And that blade shape, that nice wide belly for slicing, I have no complaints about that knife. I suppose the case knife and the Browning knife are kind of neck and neck in my opinion, but the ZT won the day. Or month. Half month. I'm very happy about finally owning a ZT. I get what the hype is all about. This is a big, heavy, solid tank of a knife. And that is my last word on that.